4 years, Kyle Richards has been forced to watch one rumor repeatedly follow her through the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills universe. Did Mauricio Umansky ever cross a line with Dorit Kemsley? The allegation has been publicly denied. Mauricio has rejected the idea that he and Dorit ever had a thing, while Kyle has also dismissed the rumors surrounding her husband and her former friend. But now imagine the internet seeing a headline claiming that Kyle Richards has finally released private producer chats supposedly exposing what happened behind the scenes. Suddenly, everything changes. Except there's a problem. There is no credible public evidence currently establishing that Kyle released secret producer messages proving an affair between Mauricio and Dorit. What is documented is already explosive. The Dorit-Mauricio rumor has been discussed publicly for years. Kyle has spoken about the effect that cheating rumors surrounding Mauricio had on her marriage, admitting that the constant speculation affected her confidence and trust. And then came the Bravo cameras. Producers repeatedly asked questions about Mauricio's alleged infidelity. Dorit was forced to address the rumors. Mauricio eventually addressed them himself. And Kyle found herself trying to navigate a situation where her husband, her former friend, and the entire Beverly Hills social circle were suddenly connected by one persistent allegation. Then things became even more complicated. Kyle and Mauricio separated. Dorit and PK's marriage also collapsed. And years after the original rumors began, Dorit and Mauricio actually sat down together on camera. Dorit later said she regretted that conversation because she felt Mauricio wasn't neutral and was essentially defending PK's position. So now fans are asking, was there ever more to the Dorit-Mauricio story? Did producers know something viewers didn't? Did Kyle receive private information that never made it to television? And if those alleged chats really existed, why would she release them now? That's where this story gets extremely interesting. Because the viral headline says leaked producer chats. But the documented timeline tells us something much more complicated. Tonight, we are breaking down the rumors, Kyle's reaction, Mauricio's denials, Dorit's involvement, the producer questions, and the biggest unanswered mystery surrounding this entire Beverly Hills saga. Because sometimes the most explosive part of a scandal isn't what was supposedly leaked. It's what the public still can't prove. Before the alleged leaked chats entered the conversation, there was already a long history of tension surrounding Kyle Richards, Mauricio Umansky, Dorit Kemsley, and PK. 4 years, these four were closely connected. Kyle and Mauricio were married. Dorit and PK were married. The couples socialized together. They appeared around each other on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And from the outside, they looked like part of one tight Beverly Hills circle. That is exactly why the old rumor involving Dorit and Mauricio became so explosive. Because it wasn't about two strangers. It was about people who were already close. The speculation became public in 2022, when former RHOBH personality Dana Wilkes shared an allegation involving Dorit and Mauricio. Dorit strongly rejected the claim and described it as a vile lie. Mauricio later denied that he and Dorit ever had a romantic relationship. But once the allegation existed, it became extremely difficult to erase. Fans started looking backward. Old photographs suddenly seemed suspicious. Friendly conversations became evidence. A simple hug could generate thousands of comments. And every time Dorit and Mauricio appeared in the same room, viewers remembered the rumor. Kyle was put in an especially difficult position. She wasn't simply watching an internet rumor about a random celebrity. She was watching speculation about her husband and one of her close friends. That creates an entirely different emotional situation. And Kyle eventually acknowledged that the constant rumors surrounding Mauricio's alleged infidelity had affected her. She admitted that the repeated speculation had chipped away at her confidence and trust within the marriage. That's important because it shows that even when a rumor isn't proven, it can still have real consequences. The rumor itself can become a problem. The repeated questions can become a problem. The public scrutiny can become a problem. And eventually, the relationship has to carry all of that weight. Then the story became even more complicated. Kyle and Mauricio's marriage began changing. They announced their separation in 2023. And suddenly, fans who had dismissed the old Dorit rumor started revisiting it. They began asking whether there had been signs they missed. But that's where hindsight becomes dangerous. A marriage ending doesn't prove an old affair allegation. Those are two completely separate claims. Still, social media doesn't always make that distinction. And the rumor continued circulating. Then Dorit's own marriage began experiencing major problems. Dorit and PK separated in 2024, and Dorit later filed for divorce in 2025. Now both couples were dealing with major relationship changes. And suddenly, the old rumor had a completely new environment in which to grow. Fans began asking, was there something happening behind the scenes that we never saw? That's the question that makes the alleged producer chats so sensational. Because if genuine production communications existed showing producers discussing the rumor internally, fans would naturally want to know what those conversations contained. But there's a crucial distinction. Discussing a rumor is not proving a rumor. Reality TV producers can discuss allegations because they are part of the storyline. They can ask cast members about them. They can decide whether the subject should appear in an episode. None of that establishes that the alleged affair actually happened. And that's why the producer chat claim needs to be treated carefully. There is currently no credible public evidence establishing that Kyle released secret production messages proving that Mauricio and Dorit had an affair. What we do have is documented discussion of the rumor on the show. Andy Cohen asked about it. Dorit denied it. Mauricio denied it. Kyle dismissed it. And the rumor continued anyway. Then came another twist. Dorit and Mauricio eventually sat down together on camera during season 15. And instead of resolving the old speculation, that conversation created another layer of tension. Dorit later said she regretted the sit-down because she felt Mauricio was not neutral and was essentially speaking from PK's perspective. So now think about the situation from Kyle's perspective. Her former husband is sitting down with her former friend. Their spouses are no longer together. Old rumors are still circulating. And fans are watching every interaction looking for hidden meaning. That is a recipe for endless speculation. But it still doesn't establish an affair. And that's the line we have to maintain. Because the title might say, Kyle releases leaked producer chats after husband's affair with Dorit. But the documented story currently supports something different. Kyle has dealt with years of rumors. Dorit has denied the allegation. Mauricio has denied it. Producers have discussed the rumors on camera. And the relationships surrounding all four people have dramatically changed. That's already a huge reality TV story. It doesn't need an invented leak. And that brings us to the next question. If Kyle didn't actually release proof of an affair, why does this producer chat narrative feel so believable to so many fans? The answer may have everything to do with how RHOBH works behind the scenes. This is where the story gets even more complicated. Because on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, rumors don't simply exist on social media. They can become storylines. Once an allegation becomes big enough, producers naturally want to know what the cast members think about it. Who heard it first? Who believes it? Who denies it? Who is angry? And, most importantly, who is willing to talk about it on camera? That is exactly what happened with the Mauricio-Dorit rumor. The allegation wasn't quietly buried. It became part of the larger conversation surrounding Kyle's marriage. And Kyle was placed in an incredibly uncomfortable position. Imagine hearing the same rumor repeatedly. Your husband, your friend, your marriage, your social circle, and millions of viewers discussing it. Even if you don't believe the allegation, hearing it over and over can eventually affect how you see the people involved. Kyle later acknowledged that the constant cheating speculation surrounding Mauricio had damaged her confidence and trust. That revelation is important because it explains why the rumor had such a lasting impact. The question wasn't simply whether Mauricio had actually cheated. The question became whether the constant suspicion itself had changed Kyle's marriage. And that's a much more complicated issue. Because a relationship can be damaged by an allegation even when the allegation is never proven. Every time someone asks about it, the couple has to deal with it again. Every time a headline appears, the rumor gets another life. Every time a fan posts an old photograph, the entire conversation starts over. And eventually, the people involved can become exhausted. That's why Kyle's reaction became such an important part of the storyline. She wasn't simply defending Mauricio. She was trying to understand what was happening to her marriage while cameras followed the entire process. And then came the separation. Kyle and Mauricio announced their separation in 2023. That immediately caused fans to revisit every old rumor. Suddenly, people started asking, were the rumors actually true? But this is where we have to stop and separate fact from speculation. A separation does not prove an affair. A marriage ending doesn't establish that a previous allegation was correct. And Kyle herself has not publicly confirmed that Mauricio had an affair with Dorit. In fact, the available public record points in the opposite direction. Dorit has denied the allegation. Mauricio has denied it. Kyle has dismissed it. And Andy Cohen has discussed the rumor publicly rather than confirming it as fact. So where does the producer chat story fit? Right in the middle of the uncertainty. Because fans love the idea of discovering what happened behind the cameras. What did producers know? What did they ask? What did cast members say privately? Was there something that couldn't be aired? Those questions are naturally fascinating. But without authentic documentation, they remain questions. And that's the difference between a real leak and an internet rumor about a leak. If someone actually releases production messages, the material can be examined. Dates can be checked. Names can be authenticated. Context can be established. But if someone simply claims, Kyle leaked producer chats, that claim doesn't automatically become true. And this is where sensational celebrity content often gets ahead of the evidence. A rumor about a rumor becomes a headline. The headline becomes a social media post. The post becomes another video. And eventually, people start remembering the claim as though it were an established event. That's exactly why this storyline needs caution. But there is still plenty of legitimate drama to discuss. Because Dorit's relationship with Kyle has changed significantly. The two women were once extremely close. Now their friendship has become strained. And the Mauricio situation is part of that larger history. Then Dorit and Mauricio sat down together during season 15. Dorit later criticized that conversation, saying she felt Mauricio wasn't neutral and was effectively defending PK. That created another awkward situation. Because Mauricio wasn't just Kyle's former husband. He was also PK's friend. Dorit was PK's estranged wife. And Kyle was Dorit's former friend. So suddenly, four people with years of shared history were connected through two separate marital breakdowns. That's reality TV gold. But it also creates a huge amount of emotional baggage. And that's why fans keep searching for hidden explanations. They want to know why friendships changed, why marriages ended, why certain people took certain sides, and whether the old rumor had anything to do with it. But again, the publicly documented evidence doesn't establish that. What it establishes is that the rumor existed, the people involved denied it, and the speculation continued to affect the relationships around them. And that may actually be the bigger story. Because the damage caused by a rumor doesn't always depend on whether the rumor is true. Sometimes the rumor itself becomes the problem. And Kyle's marriage wasn't happening in isolation. She was dealing with Mauricio's changing life, her own changing identity, their separation, and years of public speculation. At the same time, Dorit was dealing with her own marriage breakdown. So when the two women eventually found themselves on opposite sides of the same reality TV universe, the old friendship had already been transformed. And now fans want to know: did the producers simply document the collapse? Or did they know something the audience never saw? That's the question that keeps this story alive. And the answer may be hiding not in some alleged secret affair, but in the way reality television turns private pain into public entertainment. The alleged producer chats may be the headline grabbing attention, but the deeper story is the collapse of a friendship that once looked incredibly strong. Kyle Richards and Dorit Kemsley weren't always on opposite sides. They shared vacations. They celebrated together. They defended each other. They were part of the same Beverly Hills circle. And for years, viewers watched them operate as friends who seemed to understand each other's complicated lives. That's why the Mauricio rumors were so uncomfortable. When an allegation involves a stranger, it can sometimes be dismissed as internet noise. But when it involves your husband and someone you call a friend, the emotional stakes become completely different. Kyle eventually had to deal with questions about Mauricio's alleged infidelity, while simultaneously trying to protect her marriage from constant public speculation. And according to Kyle's own public comments, those rumors affected her. The repeated cheating speculation reportedly chipped away at her confidence and trust. That doesn't prove the allegations, but it demonstrates something important. Rumors can have consequences even when they are denied. And that became increasingly obvious as Kyle and Mauricio's marriage changed. Their separation in 2023 transformed the way fans looked at everything that had happened before. Old episodes were re-watched. Old conversations were analyzed. Old friendships were questioned. And suddenly, every interaction between Mauricio and Dorit was being viewed through the lens of the old rumor. But there was another major development. Dorit's own marriage to PK was also falling apart. The two eventually separated, and Dorit later filed for divorce. Now both women were navigating the breakdown of long-term marriages. And instead of becoming closer through that shared experience, their friendship became increasingly complicated. That created a strange situation. Kyle was no longer married to Mauricio. Dorit was no longer happily married to PK. Yet the old rumor connecting Mauricio and Dorit still followed them. Then came the moment fans couldn't stop talking about. Dorit and Mauricio sitting down together. On camera. In the middle of all this chaos. The conversation was supposed to address the tension surrounding PK, Dorit, and the larger group. But Dorit later criticized the interaction. She felt Mauricio wasn't neutral. From her perspective, he was defending PK rather than simply listening to her side. And that created another uncomfortable layer. Because Mauricio and PK had been friends. Dorit was PK's estranged wife. Kyle was Mauricio's estranged wife. And the old rumor was still hanging over everything. Even if the affair allegation wasn't true, the history made every interaction complicated. That's why fans began asking whether the friendship between Kyle and Dorit could ever return to what it was. Maybe the answer is no. Not necessarily because of an affair. Not necessarily because of some secret producer conversation. But because too many things changed. Marriage changed. Friendship changed. Trust changed. And reality television amplified every single crack. This is also where the alleged leaked chats become such a fascinating idea. Fans want to believe there is a hidden explanation. They want a document that finally says, "Here's what really happened." But relationships rarely work that neatly. Even if genuine producer conversations existed, they might only show what producers were discussing, not what actually happened between Mauricio and Dorit. A producer asking, "Did something happen?" doesn't mean something happened. A cast member saying, "I heard a rumor," doesn't turn the rumor into fact. And someone denying an allegation doesn't necessarily satisfy fans who already suspect otherwise. That's the problem with celebrity gossip. Once a narrative becomes established, every new piece of information gets interpreted through it. If Mauricio and Dorit stand together, fans become suspicious. If they avoid each other, fans become suspicious. If Kyle defends Mauricio, fans say she's hiding something. If Kyle criticizes him, fans say she's finally revealing the truth. There becomes no possible response that satisfies everyone. And Kyle has had to live inside that cycle for years. That's why the alleged producer chat story is so powerful as a headline, even without evidence supporting it. It promises something fans desperately want: closure. But closure doesn't necessarily exist. Sometimes the public simply never gets the complete answer. And that's especially true when four people have spent years protecting their private lives while simultaneously appearing on a reality show. The cameras show moments. They don't show everything. And viewers fill the missing spaces with theories. So when we look at Kyle, Dorit, and Mauricio today, the most significant development isn't some unconfirmed secret message. It's the fact that the relationships themselves have changed dramatically. Kyle and Mauricio went from married couple to separated partners. Dorit and PK went from married couple to estranged spouses. Kyle and Dorit's friendship suffered serious strain. And the old rumor still refuses to disappear. That's enough drama without inventing a secret. But there is still one question that keeps coming back. If Kyle really had definitive proof that Mauricio and Dorit had an affair, why hasn't she publicly presented it? And that question may be the biggest clue of all. Because until actual evidence emerges, the alleged producer chats remain exactly that: an allegation surrounding an already explosive rumor. And the next chapter gets even more complicated because Kyle now has to decide whether to keep addressing the past or finally walk away from it. At this point, the biggest mystery isn't simply whether Kyle Richards had access to behind-the-scenes conversations. It's whether there was ever anything in those conversations that could actually change the story. Because there is a huge difference between producers discussing a rumor and producers possessing proof of an affair. Reality television producers discuss allegations all the time. They need to know what the cast is saying. They need to understand where tensions are coming from. And they need to decide which conversations belong in the final episode. So even if private production messages about Mauricio and Dorit existed, that alone wouldn't prove that anything romantic happened between them. And that's exactly why the alleged Kyle leak remains such a fascinating, but unsupported, claim. The public record doesn't currently establish that Kyle released secret producer chats proving an affair. What we do know is that Kyle has spent years dealing with questions about Mauricio's alleged infidelity. She has spoken about how those rumors affected her. And she eventually separated from Mauricio. That combination has encouraged fans to connect dots that may or may not belong together. Then there is Dorit. Her relationship with Kyle has become increasingly complicated. At one point, these women were friends who trusted each other. But once marriages started collapsing and old rumors resurfaced, the friendship changed. And reality television made every disagreement more visible. Instead of having a private conversation away from cameras, their disagreements became potential storylines. Instead of quietly moving on, every awkward interaction could become a talking point. And instead of one explanation, viewers received dozens of competing interpretations. That's why the alleged producer chats are so tempting to fans. People want something definitive. They want a message that says, "This is what really happened." But real production conversations may not provide that. A producer might write, "Dorit denies the rumor." Another might write, "Kyle is upset about the speculation." Another might ask, "Can Mauricio address this on camera?" Those messages would prove that the rumor was being discussed. They would not prove the affair itself. And that's the distinction that gets lost online. Still, the timing makes the story irresistible. Kyle and Mauricio's marriage ended. Dorit and PK's marriage ended. Kyle and Dorit's friendship became strained. Mauricio and Dorit were later filmed having a tense conversation. And through all of it, the old rumor continued circulating. So naturally, fans started wondering if there was something deeper. But sometimes multiple complicated events can happen around the same people without being connected by one secret explanation. That's what makes this story so difficult to untangle. Kyle may have her own private understanding of what happened. Dorit may have hers. Mauricio may have his. And producers may have their own records of what was discussed during filming. But unless those people actually provide authentic evidence, the public can't know the complete story. And that's where Kyle's position becomes particularly interesting. She has every reason to be tired of the rumor. It involved her marriage. It involved her friendship. And it continued even after her relationship with Mauricio changed. At some point, she has to decide whether addressing the allegation gives it more power. Because every time someone responds to a rumor, the rumor gets another headline. Every denial creates another article. Every explanation creates another discussion. And every vague statement creates another round of speculation. Sometimes silence isn't an admission. Sometimes it's simply exhaustion. Meanwhile, Dorit has her own reasons for wanting distance from the entire narrative. She has dealt with questions about her relationship with Mauricio while simultaneously navigating the breakdown of her marriage to PK. And that is already enough personal drama. Then Mauricio is pulled into the conversation again. He's no longer Kyle's husband. He's no longer simply Dorit's friend's husband. He's a single man navigating his own public life. Yet the old allegation continues following him. That's the strange power of reality TV rumors. They can outlive the relationships that created them. And perhaps that's what has happened here. The marriages changed. The friendships changed. The cast changed. But the rumor stayed. So where does that leave us? Not with a confirmed affair. Not with authenticated leaked producer chats. But with a documented history of allegations, denials, relationship breakdowns, and public discussions that continue to fuel speculation. And that means the biggest unanswered question remains. Will Kyle ever reveal what she truly knows? Or will she finally decide that whatever happened behind closed doors should stay there? Because if Kyle really does possess information that changes the story, releasing it could create an entirely new level of chaos. But if she doesn't, then the alleged leaked chats headline may simply be another example of how quickly reality TV rumors can become internet mythology. And that's where this story gets even more dangerous for everyone involved. Because once fans believe there is a secret waiting to be exposed, every silence starts looking like evidence. And now we arrive at the part of the story that makes fans the most curious. What does Kyle Richards actually know? Because after years of rumors, marriage problems, friendship drama, and endless questions about Mauricio and Dorit, Kyle has had plenty of opportunities to address the speculation. But there is still no publicly established evidence that she released secret producer chats proving an affair between Mauricio and Dorit. And that matters. Because the internet can turn a rumor into a leak incredibly quickly. One person claims something was exposed. Another account repeats it. A video gives the claim a dramatic title. Then thousands of people start discussing the supposed evidence, even when nobody can actually produce the original material. That's exactly why the alleged producer chats should be treated carefully. If genuine messages ever appear, the important questions would be simple. Who created them? When were they created? Are they authentic? What was the full context? And most importantly, do they actually prove anything about Mauricio and Dorit? Without those answers, the leaked chats remain part of the speculation rather than established fact. But there's still a fascinating story underneath all of this. Kyle and Mauricio's marriage lasted for years. Their separation became public. Kyle later discussed how infidelity rumors had affected her confidence and trust. Dorit and PK's marriage also deteriorated. Kyle and Dorit's friendship became strained. And Mauricio and Dorit eventually found themselves having an uncomfortable conversation on camera. Those are real developments. And they explain why fans continue wondering whether something happened behind the scenes. But there's another possibility. Maybe there was never some giant secret. Maybe there wasn't an affair. Maybe the constant rumors simply created enough tension to damage friendships and relationships over time. That's something people often overlook. A rumor doesn't have to be true to cause damage. Imagine constantly hearing that your spouse is cheating. Imagine your friends being mentioned in the same rumor. Imagine cameras following you while strangers online analyze every interaction. Even if nothing happened, the pressure could still become exhausting. And Kyle has openly described the effect that cheating speculation had on her. That's why the emotional story may be much bigger than the alleged affair itself. It's about trust. It's about public pressure. And it's about what happens when private relationships become entertainment. For Dorit, the situation is complicated too. She has repeatedly denied the allegation. She has also experienced the breakdown of her marriage to PK. And now her relationship with Kyle is no longer what it once was. So the old rumor continues to connect people whose lives have already changed dramatically. That's why the story refuses to disappear. Every new development gives the old rumor another opportunity to resurface. But unless someone provides genuine evidence, we should not turn speculation into fact. And perhaps Kyle understands that better than anyone. Because if she truly has something definitive, releasing it could create an enormous new scandal. It could affect Mauricio. It could affect Dorit. It could affect their families. And it could completely change the way fans look at years of RHOBH history. But if she doesn't have such evidence, then continuing to address the rumor may only keep an old controversy alive. So Kyle may have a difficult choice. Expose more, or let the past stay buried. And honestly, her silence could mean absolutely nothing. It could mean she has moved on. It could mean she doesn't want to discuss private matters. It could mean she doesn't believe the rumor deserves another response. Or it could simply mean she has nothing more to add. Fans, however, will continue searching for clues. That's the nature of reality television. The audience doesn't just watch the show. They analyze it. They compare timelines. They revisit old episodes. They search interviews. They study photographs. And sometimes they connect dots that were never actually connected. So before believing the next explosive headline, remember this. A dramatic claim isn't automatically evidence. The Mauricio-Dorit rumor has been discussed publicly. Both have denied it. Kyle has dealt with the consequences of the speculation. And the relationships surrounding the situation have changed dramatically. But the alleged secret producer chats proving an affair remain unsupported by the evidence we've discussed. And that leaves one final question. If the truth really is sitting somewhere in a private production file, will anyone ever release it? Because until that happens, the mystery remains exactly that. A mystery. Now we reach the biggest unanswered question in this entire Beverly Hills saga. What happens if actual evidence ever appears? Because there is a huge difference between rumors circulating online and authentic documents that can be independently examined. For years, the Mauricio-Dorit allegation has survived despite public denials. Dorit has rejected the claim. Mauricio has rejected it. Kyle has pushed back against the speculation. Yet the rumor continues to return every time one of their relationships changes. And that's why fans remain fascinated. But if genuine producer communications were ever released, the first thing people would need to establish is whether those messages were authentic. Who wrote them? When were they written? Were they actually connected to the production? And what exactly were the producers discussing? Because even authentic production messages might not prove an affair. They could simply demonstrate that producers were aware of the rumor and wanted the cast to discuss it. That distinction would be absolutely critical. Imagine a producer message saying, "Ask Kyle about the Mauricio and Dorit rumor." That would prove the rumor was part of the production conversation. It wouldn't prove the allegation was true. Or imagine a message saying, "Dorit continues denying the claim." Again, that would establish discussion, not an affair. That's why the context surrounding any supposed leak would matter just as much as the message itself. And there's another reason this story is so complicated. Kyle's marriage is already over. She and Mauricio separated after years together. That means fans naturally want to revisit everything that happened during the marriage. But looking backward can create a dangerous illusion. When we know the ending of a story, we start interpreting every earlier event as though it was leading toward that ending. A tense conversation becomes a warning sign. A disagreement becomes proof. A friendship problem becomes evidence. But relationships are rarely that predictable. People change. Circumstances change. And marriages can end for many reasons. Kyle has spoken about how the constant infidelity rumors affected her trust and confidence, which gives us a documented understanding of how damaging the speculation became for her. But that still doesn't establish the alleged Dorit affair. And that's a distinction worth repeating. Because if this story is going to be discussed responsibly, the headline cannot become the evidence. The headline is the claim. The evidence would have to come separately. And so far, the supposed producer chat proof hasn't been established. That doesn't mean fans won't continue searching. They absolutely will. Reality TV audiences are detectives by nature. They remember old episodes. They compare timelines. They notice who sits next to whom. They revisit interviews. They analyze social media posts. And when two relationships collapse at roughly the same time, people naturally start asking whether there was a hidden connection. But sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the answer is simply that several complicated relationships reach difficult points independently. And that may be the case here. Still, one thing is undeniable. The relationship between Kyle and Dorit has changed. The relationship between Kyle and Mauricio has changed. Dorit and PK's marriage has changed. And Mauricio and Dorit's friendship has been tested publicly. So even without an affair, the fallout surrounding this entire situation is significant. And perhaps that's the most interesting part of the story. Because the real question isn't necessarily, did Mauricio and Dorit secretly have an affair? The bigger question might be, why did so many people become convinced that they did? Was it because of their friendship? Was it because viewers saw chemistry that wasn't actually there? Was it because of repeated social media rumors? Was it because Kyle's marriage eventually ended? Or was it simply because reality television trains audiences to look for hidden drama? That's something only time can really answer. And Kyle now has an interesting position. She could continue discussing the rumors. She could attempt to completely shut them down. Or she could simply refuse to give them any more attention. Whatever she chooses, fans will interpret the decision. If she speaks, people will analyze every word. If she stays silent, people may claim she's hiding something. That's the impossible position celebrities often find themselves in. There is no response that satisfies everyone. So unless authentic evidence emerges, the smartest conclusion is also the simplest. The alleged producer chats remain unsubstantiated. The affair allegation remains denied. And the documented story is one of broken relationships, public speculation, and years of reality TV drama. But if something legitimate ever does surface, then the entire conversation could change overnight. Because one authentic document could force everyone involved to answer questions they've managed to avoid for years. And that's why fans are still watching. Still wondering. Still searching. Because in Beverly Hills, the story isn't always over when the cameras stop rolling. So after everything we've uncovered, one question remains. Was there ever really something between Mauricio and Dorit? Or did years of rumors create a story that became bigger than the facts? Kyle has dealt with the speculation. Dorit has denied the allegation. Mauricio has denied it. And despite all the headlines, there's still no established public evidence proving the alleged affair or confirming that Kyle released secret producer chats exposing one. But that doesn't make the story any less fascinating. Because the friendships changed. The marriages changed. The cast dynamics changed. And somehow, this old rumor keeps finding its way back into the conversation. So now I want to hear your opinion. Fire, do you believe the Mauricio, Dorit rumors were nothing more than reality TV speculation? Fire, do you think Kyle knows more than she's publicly revealed? Fire, and if genuine producer messages ever surfaced, would that completely change your opinion of the entire RHOBH storyline? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for more Real Housewives drama, celebrity controversies, and explosive entertainment stories. Because in Beverly Hills, sometimes the biggest mystery isn't what happened. It's what nobody is willing to say.